Chapter 16, Intermission, Scattered Points of Light. Intermission, Scattered Points of Light. Beneath the surface of the world, but not far, the demon lord Baruberi slept. And as he slept, though two of his great eyes were tightly closed and unseeing, his third eye was not. For the demon's third eye did not see the dark cave in which he had retreated to since the day of opening years ago, but instead saw that which was seen through the eyes of the destined child. Though Baruberi slept, still he watched Ryu Batison of hometown, as God's time grew nearer and nearer. Eventually, Baruberi's ears picked up a familiar scratching sound approaching, accompanied by soft footsteps. Stretching his vast limbs with a great creaking of bones and cracking of chitin, he yawned once, his other two eyes opening. Turning himself, he regarded the much smaller form of his only equal among even the demon lords. "Hail, greatest of demons," the demon lord Habaruka greeted him sardonically, leaning on the cane he had used for the last 13 years. "Hail, greatest of demons," Baruberi replied. "What news from the world above? I had thought your various duties kept you busy, these days. Twice as much so as before." He smirked horribly at his own joke. "They do," Habaruka admitted, not dignifying the jest with a response. "However, there are things we should discuss, related to recent affairs." "I take it you refer to Kawadara's demise," Baruberi said, raising a chitinous eyebrow ridge. "How much do you know?" "Not as much as I would like." Habaruka shook his head. "Our only other agent in Saima is much less competent. To be expected, I suppose, since he was a recent recruit, like most of those who serve us in this world. Yourself." "I saw it with my own eye, of course, and those of the destined child," Baruberi told him, not even bothering to hide the amused tone in his voice. "It seems Kawadara's defeat came about due to a cooking competition." A long moment passed. "Kawadara," Habaruka repeated, struggling to hold laughter in. "The demon lord of slaughter, who's earned his place among our kind through sheer carnage for the last 2,000 years. The most vicious, bloodthirsty barbarian of the First Dragon War? He who led the massacre of Winlan, the genocide of Skanda, the pillage of Prima? The madman who opened the gates of his own capital to the invading army simply to enjoy the bloodshed? In a cooking competition? And to think, we used to doubt that God had a sense of humor." Baruberi chuckled. "My only regret is that he never wore one of those big white hats." "Amusing turns of fate aside," Habaruka drawled. "Despite the circumstances, somehow, I doubt it was that which directly killed Kawadara. The destined child and his comrades slew him, didn't they?" "They did." Baruberi nodded. "It was a very close thing, but in the end, they managed to triumph. And so, our designs in Saima are utterly foiled," Habaruka snarled, no longer amused. "The castle is lost to us, and the country as well. Damn Kawadara to the deepest pit of the void beyond life for failing us only when it finally, truly counts." "We knew it would be a possibility." Baruberi shrugged, unconcerned. "Laudan's line foiled the mother of our god twice over, after all. It is unsurprising that the next hero would be a formidable adversary as well." "What I want to know is who awakened the breath of fire within him," Habaruka groused. "Without that, he never would have been able to overcome Kawadara. It wasn't any of Laudan's agents, none of them were anywhere near him at the time. And that other fool hasn't stirred from his cave in the last year, as usual." "Perhaps it was blind chance," Baruberi mused. "Even for us, that must never be underestimated as a source of irritation. How else could the death of our god's mother be explained, after all?" "Perhaps," Habaruka grumbled, still sounding irritated. "At any rate, Kawadara is gone, and we're left with the cleanup." "His mission was one of convenience, rather than an absolute priority, at any rate," Baruberi reminded him. "Saima's early fall would have accelerated our conquest of this world, but it was hardly necessary. When God's time comes, we will still be able to take it for our own, like we shall take everything else." "And did you want to explain that logic to him?" Habaruka asked sarcastically. "I'm sure he'll take great comfort in that fact." "I think not." Baruberi winced. "Logic is unnecessary to our god. He knows, then. I take it he is reacting badly. The fatalities are in the triple digits already, and he shows no signs of stopping anytime soon." Habaruka shook his head. "All things considered, I suppose we should be glad we're on this side of the gate." "Indeed," Baruberi agreed dryly. "Well, hopefully his mood will be improved if Shappukai proves more successful in her goal than Kawadara was. She was doing well in her own, similar task the last time I checked. Kawadaro would still have been useful, but we still have her, Aruhameral and Necromancer at our service.
He rolled 2 of his 3 eyes.
Not that Aruhameral has been doing much recently. Perhaps that should be changed, then.
Habaruka stroked the lower half of his face, where his chin would be if he had one.
Yes, I think it's about time Aruhameral did his part in the service of our god once more. The destined child has recruited all but 2 of his companions now,
Baruberry mused.
She is out of the question, of course, but perhaps the last of them. The wise trees.
Habaruka snapped his tentacles, hissing.
I knew I was forgetting something. The eldest of them will recognize our work, and be able to tell the destined child. We must remedy this oversight immediately. Well then, it seems we have our answer.
Baruberry smirked, unconcerned.
Aruhameral will be perfect for this task. Send him to deal with the eldest of the wise trees, immediately.
He thought for a moment, then continued.
And we might as well tell MC Tusk to have some fun with the 8th as well. Throwing him under the cart.
Habaruka sounded amused again.
My, what a way to reward loyal service. We might as well get some use out of him,
Baruberry pointed out.
August and Joker managed to hold their own against them, but they dispatched Trout without much trouble. Their strength is growing fast. It won't be long before only the Demon Lords will be able to pose a threat, as is always the way with Loudon's line. Better to have as many of our lesser servants do their part before they become a joke. Tusk was always a joke.
Habaruka snorted.
And you're one to talk, about both him and Aruhameral. You've been sleeping in here for the last 10 years, doing nothing but watching and waiting. The others might start to think that you're losing your touch, at this rate. Wouldn't that be a tragedy and a comedy? Then that is their mistake, and should they act upon it, it will be their pain as well,
Baruberry growled, then paused thoughtfully.
All the same, you may have a point.
Stretching again, he spread his arms and flexed his claws as he continued.
Perhaps I have spent enough time waiting and watching. With Kawadara's death. Yes, I think it is time I stepped out for a bit and had a little fun.
He smiled, slow and terrible.
This should be good, then.
Habaruka smiled as well, just as ghastly, before turning away.
I'll leave you to it, then, and await the results. As you said, I do have a great deal of business of my own to attend to. The boy is doing well, I take it.
Baruberry asked as his fellow demon lord began to walk off, cane tapping.
Heh.
Habaruka paused for a moment before continuing forward.
Well enough. Necromancer has expressed some concerns, but I doubt they're much to worry about. Necromancer's opinions are somewhat unreliable,
Baruberry said dryly.
We didn't recruit him for his opinions,
Habaruka reminded him.
The boy is doing fine. In some regards, you could say he's surprised even me. Worry not, he will fulfill his destined purpose in due time. As will we all,
Baruberry murmured.
Good enough, then. Until next time.
He started to glance away, then chuckled.
Oh, and give my regards to Gainer.
This time, Habaruka did laugh as he disappeared into the depths of the cavern, cane clicking against the stone beneath them. Only once his fellow demon lord was gone did Baruberry move again. Rising up to his full height, he flexed his claws and flapped his vestigial wings. Cracking his neck, he twisted his mighty tail, then began to move, walking through the tunnels towards the nearest exit of the caverns on spider-like legs. It was going to be a very bad day for the citizens of the town of Gate. It was a bit of a trial for Patty Smith, finding a place where she could feel comfortable relaxing. Even once she was clear of hometown, she remembered blazing a trail of petty theft all the way to Oria's eastern border more to keep her hand in the inn for much actual profit, and it hadn't been long enough ago that she felt comfortable in any town or village she had hit. She was forced to resort to staying out in the wilderness until she made her way to somewhere off the path she had taken last time she was in the country. The closest place to find that, as it turned out, was to the south. Not many travelers left Oria by that way, largely due to the massive mountain range that Mount Phoebe was only the tip of, stretching from west coast to east for hundreds of miles down the continent to Highland on the other side. Where exactly the border between the two countries fell was somewhat imprecise. Nobody in their right mind actually cared all that much about terrain so difficult to traverse. Still, a way out was a way out, and Patty wasn't in any position to be picky. After the close call she had had in Trout's dungeon, she had no intentions of taking any more risks anytime soon. Even though she stayed away from towns, she still didn't truly relax until she had reached the edge of the mountains and started making her way up. Only then did the edge of paranoia leave her, and she continued up to a mountainside village that served as a wayside rest point for those few travelers who dared this path in a much better mood. The bartender at the only tavern in town was insultingly cautionary about a little thing like her braving the route alone, warning her repeatedly about monsters and bandits, but Patty wasn't in the mood to educate him on who exactly would be the ones who needed to watch out for who. Instead, she simply waved him off and took her mug out onto the porch to drink in solitude. Staring up at the night sky, she found her thoughts drifting back to hometown, and to the mercenaries who had first thrown her under the cart, then pulled her back out from under it. Despite their inconsistencies, which were both amusing and irritating, she had to admit that she had kind of liked the Stooges. Regardless of all the complaining she had done, she did understand that it had been just business, rather than anything personal. On the whole, they had been a lot more decent about it than most people in their line of work would be, even before Bao had come back to save her from Trout's tender mercies.
Wonder what they're up to now,
she muttered to herself, staring up at the sky. Against all her instincts honed by a life in the gutter, she almost hoped she had run into them again one day, hopefully on friendlier terms this time. It wasn't a crush, the men in the company had been pretty good looking, but they weren't really her type. Besides, despite the flirting she tended to do when actually on her game, romance wasn't a thing she was concerned with. That would require actually trusting somebody, and that wasn't going to happen, even with people she liked.
Good luck, boys and girls,
she murmured in the end, raising her mug to them, wherever they were.
Try and avoid demons from now on. That kind of shit isn't your business, and it isn't your problem.
Finishing the mug, she glanced back inside, wondering if she should go back in for another one.
Now I just have to figure out what to do from here. I don't know what you were talking about before, miss, but that I can probably help you with,
a man said lightly, walking out of the tavern and sitting down on the porch next to her. He had 2 more mugs of ale in his hands, and set one down by her with a wink.
For starters, you can't go wrong with a pint or 2 more, no matter what's going on. One of life's truths, you know? Just like how you can't go wrong buying around for a cute girl. Thanks for the tip.
Patty started to snark, then stopped, irritation fading as she recognized who it was. There weren't many Warren clansmen in the world, after all, aside from the loudmouthed girl back in Oria, she had only met one before.
Well, isn't this a coincidence? What are you doing here, Mr. Lee? And for that matter, how exactly did you get in there in the first place without me seeing you? I've got skills,
Tiga Lee bragged easily, taking a long draught of his ale.
As for your first question? Looking for you, actually. Took me a damn long time, too. After you didn't show up for our meeting at the Wildcat Cafe, I started snooping around, and picked up your trail eventually.
He gave her an amused glance.
Sima Ford was a bit too much for you to handle, hey? Oh, bite me.
She rolled her eyes.
Actually, don't. Yeah, okay, I got a little cocky trying to swipe a national treasure. I almost had it, though.
She glanced over into the tavern, and recognizing what she had been looking for, raised her voice.
Why don't you come on out here and join us as well, Miss Parsha? Almost doesn't cut it, babe.
Tiga smiled, then looked over his shoulder.
Good eyes, though. Told you she'd spot you, Clarice. So it seems,
Clarice Parsha, Tiga's right-hand woman, murmured dryly as she walked out onto the porch, a glass of wine in her hand. Red-haired and tanned, wearing a slim blue dress that left her arms and legs bare, she accompanied the leader of the renegades even when most of the group stayed behind in order to temper his exuberance. Outwardly a study in opposites from Tiga, as serious and practical as he was wild and boisterous, her blue eyes had a well-hidden glint of mischief and adventurousness in them that she wasn't quite able to conceal.
We were sorry to hear of your difficulties, Miss Smith,
she said, sitting down next to Tiga, so that any passers-by would simply see a handsome man with a pretty girl on each side.
On the whole, thought, it's probably for the best that they took you to Oria, despite the inconvenience of following you here. Springing you from Sima Ford would have been tricky. You guys like me that much?
Patty batted her eyelashes.
I'm flattered. We like your Zenny that much,
Tiga corrected her, chuckling.
Don't get me wrong, you're pretty cute, but that doesn't pay the bills. You are still going to be able to pay our fees, right?
Clarice asked pointedly.
What do you take me for?
Patty rolled her eyes.
I deposited most of it in the Bank of Prima every time I passed through a capital. What they took off of me was barely a tenth of what I was able to nab on that trip. They?
Clarice asked, curious, then shook her head.
Never mind, it doesn't matter. So long as you pay up on time, that's all we need to know. You know what I love about the Menero clan?
Tika remarked cheerfully.
3 magic little words. No questions asked. God bless modern society, whichever god you like.
He paused before continuing, voice growing serious.
Gonna have to disagree with you there, though, Clarice. See, I've been thinking maybe it's about time you filled us in on just what exactly it is you're going to be paying us this much for, Miss Smith. With that kind of a price tag, I'm guessing it's not what you would call normal business. Knew it would come to this eventually,
Patty muttered, hastily re-evaluating her opinion of Tika. He looked like nothing more than a rough, tough playboy, and that was mostly what he was, but not entirely.
Didn't we agree that part of that 100 grand down payment went towards not asking too many questions about that sort of thing? Sure it did,
Tika admitted easily.
But there's only so long that I can justify that, you know? Eventually, a guy starts wondering about these sorts of things. Particularly related to how they pertain to the safety of the men under his command.
He glanced at Clarice, who slowly nodded.
It's your call, of course, when you get right down to it. You're the employer. But we'd both feel a lot better about this if we knew a little more about what exactly we're going to be getting into. I suppose it's better that you find out now, rather than at a worse time,
Patty conceded. Taking a deep breath, she continued, eyes hard.
My reasons are my own, and those, I don't feel like sharing. But what I'm going to be asking you to do in the end is to bring down the city of Evray, and the Church of St. Eva. If you have a problem with that, we might want to go our separate ways now.
A stunned silence followed her declaration, as Tika and Clarice exchanged a wide-eyed glance.
Well,
Clarice said eventually.
This explains the amount of zenny, at any rate. No kidding,
Tika muttered, but despite his shock, his eyes were starting to glint.
Taking down the Church of St. Eva. Damn. That's not something you do every day, even in this line of work. Something like that. To hell with notoriety. We'd go down in dem history. We'd also make enemies of half the entire world, at a minimum,
Clarice murmured.
Just pointing that out. True.
Tika shrugged.
But the other half would keep us in business, now wouldn't they?
He thought for a moment.
Any of the guys going to have a problem with this? Mick's the only one who follows the church, and he's not exactly devoted.
Clarice shook her head.
At this point, I think it's only habit. I'm sure this much zenny will encourage him to consider agnosticism in a new light. Then I say we go for it.
Tika nodded to Patty, who had been watching them discuss it with a slight smirk.
Just tell us what to do and we'll do it, so long as you're paid up. We have ourselves a deal, Miss Smith. Down with the Church of St. Eva it is. That a fact, son.
An unfriendly, drunken voice growled, and they turned their heads to see a mob of villagers forming, all of them glaring.
You folks really should learn to talk quieter. You know what we do to heathens around these parts. Here it goes.
Patty sighed, starting to rise, then paused as Tika held up a hand.
Let me handle this.
The Warren clansman stood up, cracked his neck and flexed his clawed fingers.
You wanted to rumble, boys, you should have just said so in the first place. Don't blame me if you can't walk it off, though. Get M.
The leader growled, and the mob charged as Tika lunged into the fray.
Should we?
Patty started to ask Clarice, then trailed off, wide-eyed, as she watched Tika tear through the mob with his bare hands as if they were made of paper and glass.
Get him another mug.
Clarice finished the sentence wryly.
Probably. He'll want one by the time he's done.
She glanced at Patty, amused.
Surprised? I thought you hired us because we were the best, didn't you? I suppose I did, didn't I?
Patty smiled slowly as a villager flew past her, bouncing off the tree.
Well then. Let's get those refills. For some reason, I'm in a good mood tonight myself.
The Isle of Gunts was one of the only 4 nations in the world unattached to a continent, along with the Isle of Tunlin, the Isle of Evray, and the undersea city-state of Prima. It had once been part of the southeast, occupying a peninsula that had stretched up from the west of what was now Highland, but a geological disruption had sunk the southern end into the sea and shifted what was left further west, in one of the greatest tragedies of the millennium. Even now, the Builder clan native to Gunts were still recovering from the loss of life, and their numbers remained relatively low. All of this was in the past, of course, but Ray Braddock had a deep interest in history, for a variety of reasons. When his thoughts wandered, as they were doing today, he couldn't help but consider what had made a country what it was today. The sense of the past was helped by where he was sitting, eating his lunch under the noon sun. The center of the city of Gant, the island's capital, was a square around a 30-foot statue of the greatest hero the Builder clan had ever known, the warrior known only as Ox, who had helped usher in the end of the Second Dragon War. It was on a bench before that statue that Ray sat, eating his sandwich. That was where he would meet his friend, if she was in town as he suspected. The Church of St. Eva had arranged meeting points in every nation's capital that were known to those in its employ, and while Kay wasn't technically a servant of God's will, she was privy to many of the Church's secrets regardless. She shared the same past as him, after all, even if she was the only one of the three of them not to choose the path of the Paladin, and the Church remembered that sort of thing.
Ray.
Her voice jerked him out of his thoughts, and he looked up, smiling, as she approached. No matter how many times he saw her, it was always slightly surprising to see Kay as the woman she had become, rather than the girl he had grown up with. She was pretty in a modest way, conservatively dressed in white as always, with her honey blonde hair tied back by a ribbon. Smiling back, she sat down next to him.
I got your message. How long have you been here? I just arrived yesterday,
he replied as she took a sandwich of her own out from the black bag she carried in one hand. Raising an eyebrow, he regarded it, voice growing amused.
I've never seen that being used medically before. How does it work? Oh, hush.
She shook her head.
There's no law against carrying your lunch with your supplies.
Instead of becoming a paladin like her adopted brothers, Kay had studied medicine once reaching maturity. Even with white magic a common skill, there were many ailments that only a skilled doctor could remedy, and she had taken to the practice with an honest desire to help people. Unfortunately, finding a place to set up shop in had proved difficult for her.
It's a good thing you came when you did. I was planning on leaving soon. I'd have regretted missing you,
Ray said, frowning.
No luck here either, then. No.
She shook her head.
Gunts has enough doctors already too. You'll find something soon,
he assured her.
Saint Eva is simply waiting for you to find where you belong. You'll know it when you see it. I know,
she said, her smile returning.
I'm glad to have seen you again, anyways. We didn't really get to spend much time together in Corsair. My fault, I'm afraid,
Ray told her.
I had to leave the city rather quickly. There were certain complications. I remember.
She nodded.
I still wish we had had more time to. Well, to catch up.
She looked away.
I like spending time with you. And I with you,
Ray replied gently. He was aware of her feelings, of course, he'd have to have been blind not to be. Had he followed a different path in life, he might even have returned them. Unfortunately, it was not to be. A paladin's vows were absolute, and he could no more consider a relationship with his childhood friend than with the girl who had captured his heart with a glance. This wasn't the time to think of her, though, so he quickly sought another topic of conversation.
I saw Gabriel recently. He's doing well. Good.
Kay smiled again.
It's been a lot longer since I've seen him. I'm starting to think he's avoiding me, after.
She let it hang.
It's a possibility,
Ray admitted. Gabriel was the third of the orphans who had been taken in and raised together, a paladin like Ray, and he had developed his own feelings for Kay that she had gently rebuffed before he took his vows.
I doubt he holds it against you, but it may still be too soon. Too painful. He'll heal in time, though, I'm sure. I hope so,
Kay murmured.
He was doing well, then. He was enthusiastic,
Ray recalled.
Our ships were both at anchor in a harbor town east of here, he was heading north, and I south. He was part of a delegation of the church to Sima Fort. Sima.
Kay frowned thoughtfully.
Why would a delegation be heading there? Gabriel claimed that Prince Ikaru was interested in converting to the church, and establishing its presence within his country,
Ray said, trying to keep his voice as neutral as possible.
Oh, Ray, that's wonderful.
Kay nearly dropped her sandwich in her excitement.
The church has wanted to expand into Sima for so long. Indeed.
Ray forced himself to agree, despite his suspicions.
I only hope that Gabriel was correct. Why wouldn't he be?
Kay asked, then frowned.
There's something you're not telling me, Ray. Just like in Corsair. What's wrong? I'm sorry, but I'm not in a situation where I can speak freely,
Ray told her honestly. If he could talk of what he had seen in the world, and what he suspected was happening in Sima, Kay would have been one of the first people he would tell, but that wasn't his choice to make.
It involves something I haven't told anybody about who wasn't involved.
He took a deep breath before continuing.
Not even father. This is serious, then,
Kay murmured, stunned.
I didn't think there was anything you would conceal from father. I'm not concealing it,
Ray objected, realizing even as he said it that it was a little too quick.
I'm simply waiting for the right moment to seek his wisdom on the matter. If you say so,
Kay replied after a moment.
Have you seen him recently, then? Father.
Ray shook his head.
No, it's been some time since I returned to Evray. The last I heard, though, he was in good health for his age. I'm glad to hear that,
Kay said, then glanced to their left.
I should stop by and see him soon myself. Oh, it seems you have some company. Sir Ray.
The innkeeper of the establishment Ray was staying in, a stout builder clansman in his mid-40s, greeted him as he skidded to a halt, puffing. Even a physically unremarkable specimen such as himself towered over them both, 10 feet tall with arms like tree trunks and broad, deadly horns atop his head.
My apologies, but you requested to be informed immediately if any messages arrived for you. This was magically delivered only a few minutes ago.
He held out an envelope with Ray's name on it in one hairy, muscular hand.
We don't know who sent it, I'm afraid. My thanks,
Ray replied politely, taking it. It didn't bear the seal of the church, which meant he didn't know who it could be either.
You're welcome, sir.
The innkeeper smiled.
I'll come find you again if any more arrive.
Turning, he walked off at a more sedate pace.
Who do you suppose it's from?
Kay asked, curious.
Do you recognize the handwriting? Not at all.
Ray shook his head, opening it and removing the letter inside.
Let's see here. Greetings, Mr. Braddock. You are cordially invited to a gathering of friends and associates over the next week at Duke Kilgore's lakeside vacation home, in southern Sima. In addition to enjoying the Duke's hospitality, those present will be discussing recent business involving several notable individuals in Oria, Tentar, Windia, Camlin and Sima. While we will understand if you are unable to attend, your presence would be greatly appreciated. As clear as mud.
Kay shook her head.
It sounds to me like they're trying to be intentionally vague in case the message fell into the wrong hands. Who's it signed by? Elder Allen of the Rangers Guild, hometown branch,
Ray murmured, thoughts racing, that confirmed his suspicions as to who had actually sent the letter.
Very interesting. Is this about what you're not telling me?
Kay guessed.
I'd wager on it, were I not a man of the church,
Ray replied, still thinking.
It seems to me that they're trying to conceal it under the guise of a social gathering, though.
He glanced at Kay.
Perhaps it would look better if I was accompanied, with that in mind. Was your departure on a fixed schedule? Not really.
She shook her head.
I was considering going to southern Oria, to see if that new town being built west of Mount Phoebe needed a doctor, but that can wait. Wait, what?
Ray blinked.
What new town west of Mount Phoebe? Rumor has it that somebody's renovating some old ruins over there,
Kay explained.
Building a new town from the remains of the old. They say 3 renowned carpenters from Capitan were hired to handle it. What's wrong? Oh, nothing,
Ray groaned, clutching his face with one hand. Lowering it, he sighed.
I can't wait to see how they'll react to this one. They?
Kay asked.
Do you remember that friend of mine I had you take a look at, back in Oria?
Ray told her after a moment's consideration.
Mr. Battison. Of course.
She frowned now, clearly concerned.
Scandine death spider poisoning. Even though he took the antidote, it was a close thing. He was involved with why you had to leave town so quickly.
It wasn't a question.
He was.
Ray nodded.
But he's a friend of mine, as are all of his companions. If they're asking me to come to this gathering, they have news they think I should hear, related to the circumstances both they and I were involved in. It must be important, if you're placing priority on it above spreading St. Eva's word in guns,
Kay said quietly.
Indeed,
Ray agreed firmly.
There is evil abroad in the world, Kay, and it threatens us all, believer and non-believer alike. If we do not find its source, all life will fall into the depths of the abyss. If you'll come with me, then we leave tomorrow morning, assuming I can find a mage willing to warp us to Sima. May St. Eva guide our path.
As the sun set, the man who called himself Martin made his way back to the cavern he had called home for the last decade. The clouds were rolling in, above northern Sima, promising rain that evening. He paid them no mind, concentrating simply on hauling the carcass of the deer he had slaughtered back to the cavern. It was at the top of the waterfall that led into the river Sima, near the notorious Wildcat Cafe. Skirting around the edge of the lesser river atop the fall, he pushed aside the trick boulder that concealed his home and walked inside.
Dinner?
A familiar voice asked dryly from the back of the cave.
How considerate of you, boss. You know me,
Martin replied as the fire pit in the center of the cave lit up, illuminating 3 visitors.
Considerate. Give me a hand with this, will you? Of course.
Karn walked forward, a short, compact old man who still wore the same odd, banana-yellow shorts and tunic he had always favored. Dark of skin and silver of hair, his eyes still held a twinkle of mischief despite his age, more advanced than almost anybody in the world could have guessed. Grabbing the deer's hind legs, he helped Ryu haul it over to the fire.
We should probably let Goba do the cooking, though, unless yours has improved a lot more in the last 10 years than it ever did in the 1,000 before that. I know mine hasn't. Everybody's a critic.
Martin rolled his eyes.
Well, Goba. I suppose it's for the best.
The portly Menero shrugged, stepping out of the shadows as well.
Nothing personal, boss, but Dee's cooked better than you.
He paused, then winced, glancing over his shoulder.
Sorry, Bo wasn't thinking. It's fine,
Bo drawled, joining them.
After knowing you for a millennium, I'm used to you running your mouth.
He glanced over to Martin.
Sorry, we dropped by without sending word, but we didn't want to tip off any lurking eyes. They don't come around here anymore, after what I did to the last one, but I appreciate the thought.
Martin shook his head.
I take it she's not coming, then? Dee's, I mean. She's stubborn that way,
Bo reminded him.
Sent us a message wishing us luck, but she's not going to make contact with us herself unless they do, with her along. I don't know if it's the rules, or whatever, but...
He trailed off, closing his eyes, and the others looked away. They all knew the reason Dees was avoiding him, and that it had nothing to do with the rules, but none of them were going to say it.
Any idea how long it's going to be before they figure it out?
Karn asked eventually.
She's not exactly being subtle about it. Maybe it's not subtle to us,
Gobi corrected him.
Or to the demons, or Lauden's agents. But those kids don't see the world the same way any of us do. They don't know this shit. They don't even know as much as we did, back when it was our turn. Not even close. Of course they don't.
Martin shook his head.
That was intentional. It has its downsides, but it's better than how things turned out for us.
He stared at the fire for a while, during which nobody spoke again.
Help me out with this, will you?
Gobi asked Bo eventually, having spitted the deer. Together, the two of them hoisted it over the fire as he continued.
They seemed to be doing well, the last time I saw them. Heading out to the Wildcat Cafe, for some damned reason, but I figure they knew what they were doing. They killed Kawadara,
Martin said casually.
About a week and a half ago. Really?
The Menero whistled.
Damn, they're getting better fast. We took a lot longer than that before we were able to take Cord out. They're up to 7 now, right?
Karn reminded him.
Since that old guy doesn't really count. We were at 7 too when we killed Court. Yeah, but there were only 8 of us,
Gobi pointed out.
1 more every time means there'll be 9 for them. Might not seem like a big difference, but when you look at it in terms of percentages, it's a different story. Well, I'm not complaining.
Bo rolled his eyes.
Kawadara always was an asshole. They all are.
He frowned.
It can't have been an easy kill, though. Hell of a lot harder than Court was, and that's saying something,
Martin agreed.
On the whole, perhaps it's for the best that the kid's breath of fire was brought out, even if it does strengthen his connection to Laden. He doesn't seem to have been changed much by it, and without it, Kawadara would have won. I really am sorry about that,
Karn apologized for the 100th time since the incident.
I had no idea those two were going to go do something crazy like that. I barely managed to warp over there in time to get them out of there.
He made a rude noise.
Descendants. Sometimes I think they're not worth the trouble. They have their good points,
Martin commented dryly.
At any rate, the kids don't suspect anything, as far as I know. Not about us, at least. Good to hear.
Gobi exhaled heavily.
I'm being careful not to let them catch me near them often enough, so they don't get suspicious. Should probably wait another month or 2 more before running into them again to be on the safe side. I haven't even seen them at all, aside from when my great daughter's house blew sky high,
Karn added, and Bo nodded in agreement as well.
Good,
Martin said.
I don't think they've spotted any of Lauden's agents either. The kids only actually met one of them, right? Yeah,
Gobi confirmed.
Bunyan, over in Tentar. He's going by Babadari at the moment. I made sure to drop by after the kid headed off and grill him. He swears he was just playing along like any normal lumberjack would and didn't say anything out of place, and I figure he was telling the truth. Bunyan's the honest type.
He grimaced.
I hate the honest types. That just leaves the demons, then.
Bo snorted.
Is it any surprise that they're not playing by the rules? I guess with Kawadara, it says a lot that he even tried to,
Martin murmured sarcastically.
He only blew his cover when he got desperate. The other three were all just grunts, so they probably didn't understand just what a bad idea it was to violate that particular agreement.
He shrugged.
Oh well. Their problem. 3.
Karn raised an eyebrow.
They found Trout out,
he explained.
It was probably only a matter of time. There was a reason they gave the job of watching the kids to the most expendable schmuck they had in this side of the world. Speaking of demons near the kids,
Bo said gravely.
Am I the only one who's worried about Shapukai? Specifically, her involvement in Mr. Legacy's past. I've been trying not to think about that, actually.
Gobi made a face.
It's going to be trouble, all right,
Martin agreed, ignoring him.
That kind of thing always is. Still, of them all, he's the least to be concerned about such issues. I doubt it's something they won't be able to overcome when the time comes. How do you know all this stuff, anyways?
Gobi asked curiously.
You haven't been keeping an eye on them. I'd have seen you. I haven't,
Martin agreed, closing his eyes.
But Nina has. She sees many things, in her current state. Sorry, boss,
Gobi muttered after a moment.
If I'd known, I wouldn't have.
He trailed off awkwardly.
It's fine,
Martin told him.
I went to see her again a little while ago.
Opening his eyes again, he stared at the fire.
I guess this is as good a time as any to tell you. After we see how this ends. I've been thinking about joining her. It's your call, boss,
Bo said, shaking his head.
We're not going to tell you no. Not after everything you've already been through. Kind of hoping you'll stick around, all the same, but if that's what you decide on. Your call. Look on the bright side,
Karn suggested.
For all we know, this'll end up being the one the good guys don't win, and we'll all die horribly. That way, you won't have to make that call after all. You won't have a choice in the matter. That's the bright side,
Gobi remarked.
We got a better deal back in the old days when we worked with Lawton. No,
Martin said firmly, eyes burning.
No, we didn't. We just didn't know, until it was too late.
Yet again, a long silence followed his statement, as they all stared into the fire, remembering their past, and the friends no longer with them.
Dinner's ready,
Gobi said eventually, and they all carved off portions of the deer to eat in further silence, taking what comfort they could in each other's companionship. There was little else for them to enjoy at the moment. 4 tired, cynical old men, some more bitter than others, content to simply watch history continue its course without interfering further. They had learned all too well what price destiny claimed at the door long ago.